The House Select Committee, formed to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, convened its first hearing yesterday, hosting a panel of 4 police officers who defended the building against a mob of supporters of then-President Donald Trump. The testimony, which included new video footage from the day, was both emotional and dramatic, as the officers described being overwhelmed by rioters who were better equipped for the battle that unfolded. The 4 officers, Officer Harry Dunn and Sergeant Aquino Gonell of the U.S. Capitol Police, and Michael Fannon and Daniel Hodges of the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, each gave opening statements and answered questions from committee members. We're joined live by S24 reporter Gilles Gibson for more on this discussion, all the way from Washington, D.C. Hello, Gilles. All right, I can hear you now. I hope you're having a good day. Wonderful. Now, watching the testimonies yesterday was very emotional for those in the chambers and, of course, those at home. What are some of the key points brought out by the 4 officers during their testimonies on what happened on January 6th?
Well, watching this testimony over the course of the day, they went on for several hours. It was just pretty extraordinary and pretty emotional to watch these 4 police officers talking about what it was like to be a police officer on the ground on January the 6th when this mob of Trump supporters were trying, and of course we know that they eventually successfully managed to break into the heart of American democracy, into the US Capitol building itself. As you were saying, we heard from 4 different police officers in total. Sergeant Aquilino Gonell, who's a sergeant in the US Capitol Police, which is the special police department that is in charge of protecting the US Capitol complex. He described the sort of violence that day as like a medieval battle, fought hand to hand, inch by inch. We also heard from Harry Dunn, who's an African-American police officer in the Capitol Police as well, and he emotionally over several minutes described how he was subjected to racist abuse by Trump supporters who were also trying to get past him and his colleagues and break into the Capitol complex. We also saw some pretty extraordinary body camera video from the viewpoint of an officer who was holding a riot shield with several of his colleagues trying to stop a group of Trump supporters breaking into the Capitol building. In this extraordinary video, what you see really is this police officer being dragged away from his colleagues. You can see him sort of screaming in pain, and then he actually at one point says, you can make out in the video, he says, "I have kids." So he's clearly pleading with this violent, angry crowd, and it seems like he's fearing for his life. So it was just an extraordinary few hours here in Washington listening to these 4 police officers describe what it was like to defend the Capitol building that day around 7 months ago.
All right, there doesn't seem to be a consensus on how to treat what has been termed an insurrection on Capitol Hill. What are some of the things discussed by both the Democratic and Republican representatives yesterday?
Well, even before we got into the hearing, we actually had a pitch battle up on Capitol Hill about who was going to be sitting on this committee from the Republicans and the Democrats. And that's because the Democratic Speaker Nancy Pelosi actually blocked the nomination of 2 Republican congressmen, saying that they had made statements and took actions that just made it ridiculous to put them on such a committee. The House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, who's a Republican, then decided to pull all 5 of his nominations, all 5 Republican representatives that he had put forward. Then what Nancy Pelosi, the Democrat House Speaker, did in retaliation to that was she appointed 2 Republicans, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. They are both Republican representatives, but we also have to note that they both voted in support of impeaching then US President Donald Trump in the days after the 6th of January attack on the Capitol. And in response to that, we saw Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader, actually giving a press conference before this hearing even took place. He said that it was a failed committee, despite the fact that at that stage they hadn't even had a single minute of any hearings. And he also described it as a sham. So you do have 2 Republican representatives sitting on this committee, which is, of course, dominated by Democrats, but the Republican leadership in the House are really just not engaging with this committee, trying to dismiss the entire process.
Now, of course, a number of people that rushed and broke into the Capitol have been arrested and, of course, some charged. Do you think this has changed people's minds on the severity of the day's actions, or has this just further divided the nation?
Yeah, what we're seeing is, as this select committee is going to be playing out over the coming weeks and the coming months, it's not exactly clear how long they'll go on for. There's no deadline for them to produce a report. Of course, this first hearing focused on this testimony from these 4 police officers, but this committee could really look into all sorts of things in terms of what led up to that day, the violence at the Capitol, potentially how security at the Capitol can be improved going forward in the coming months and the coming years. In terms of the investigation, which is largely being run by the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, they've made more than 500 arrests. People who are accused of being in the Capitol that day, of breaking several different laws by breaking into the building and potentially causing damage as well. But out of those more than 500 people who have been arrested, there have actually only been a handful of convictions. So the investigation is still very much playing out 7 months later. And of course, the more political process, the investigation up on Capitol Hill is still ongoing as well, with this select committee, which, as I was just saying, is really not supported at all by the Republican leadership in the House of Representatives.
All right, then. Anything else you'd like to add before I let you go?
Yeah, I think one thing that we will be watching very closely is how the next sort of few hearings go on, really. This was just the opening hearing. We could see several more hearings from this select committee in the coming weeks and the coming months. The Democratic chairman of the committee, Benny Thompson, has said that nobody is off limits. There is speculation that former US President Donald Trump could be called to testify at this committee. Of course, we'll have to see how that plays out and whether he would actually be prepared to do so as a former president.
All right, then. Thank you so much for joining us, guys.